Question 1. Market research demonstrates that public trust in law enforcement is significantly influenced by adherence to constitutional rights during investigations. Considering a situation in Charlotte, North Carolina, where officers have received an anonymous tip alleging a specific individual is storing stolen goods in their residence, what is the most legally and ethically sound approach for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, to pursue to gather evidence? Option A. Present the anonymous tip, along with any corroborating observations made by officers, to a magistrate to seek a search warrant for the residence. Option B. Inform the individual that they are suspected of storing stolen goods and wait for them to voluntarily reveal the location of the items. Option C. Detain the individual outside their residence and pressure them to consent to a search, emphasizing the potential consequences of refusal. Option D. Conduct a warrantless search of the residence based on the anonymous tip, believing that the urgency of the situation justifies immediate action. The correct answer is A. Present the anonymous tip, along with any corroborating observations made by officers, to a magistrate to seek a search warrant for the residence. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in law enforcement, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical constraints governing evidence collection and individual rights. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, operates under North Carolina state law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The core of the challenge lies in obtaining crucial information without violating these protections, which could render the evidence inadmissible and lead to legal repercussions. The best approach involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This method is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment's requirement for judicial oversight before a search or seizure can be deemed reasonable. Probable cause, as established by North Carolina case law and federal precedent, signifies a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed and that evidence of the crime will be found in the place to be searched. By presenting sworn testimony and evidence to a neutral magistrate, officers demonstrate that their suspicions are not arbitrary but are grounded in sufficient facts. This process ensures that the decision to intrude upon an individual's privacy is made by an independent judicial officer, thereby safeguarding civil liberties. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a warrantless search based solely on a hunch or a tip from an unreliable informant. This fails to meet the probable cause standard and bypasses the necessary judicial review. Such an action directly violates the Fourth Amendment and North Carolina's search and seizure laws, making any evidence obtained inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Another incorrect approach is to coerce a confession or consent from the individual under duress. Consent can waive Fourth Amendment protections. It must be freely and voluntarily given. Coercion negates the voluntariness of consent, rendering it invalid. Furthermore, forcing a statement without proper Miranda warnings, if the individual is in custody, is a violation of Fifth Amendment rights, also leading to the suppression of evidence. A third incorrect approach is to delay the investigation indefinitely while waiting for a perfect opportunity or additional, less critical information. While thoroughness is important, unreasonable delays can prejudice an investigation and potentially allow evidence to be destroyed or suspects to evade capture. The law requires prompt action based on established legal standards, not indefinite inaction. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the available information against legal standards. Officers should first assess whether probable cause exists for a search or arrest. If probable cause is present, they should then determine the most legally sound method for gathering evidence, prioritizing obtaining a warrant when feasible. If exigent circumstances exist, e.g., imminent destruction of evidence, immediate danger to life, officers may be justified in acting without a warrant, but this exception is narrowly construed and requires strong justification. Throughout the process, officers must be mindful of an individual's constitutional rights and adhere strictly to departmental policy and legal precedent. Question 2. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for officers to demonstrate a strong understanding of search warrant execution protocols within North Carolina. If a Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department officer is executing a search warrant for specific stolen electronics at a residence, and during the lawful execution of that warrant, the officer observes what appears to be a large quantity of illegal narcotics in plain view on a table, what is the most appropriate course of action according to North Carolina law and standard police procedure? Option A. Seize the narcotics, as their incriminating nature is immediately apparent and they are in plain view during a lawful search. Option B. Seize the narcotics and immediately halt the search for electronics, then secure the scene and contact a supervisor and the district attorney's office for further instructions. Option C. Ignore the narcotics and continue searching only for the stolen electronics listed in the warrant. Option D. Immediately stop the search for electronics and begin searching for any and all illegal items that might be present. The correct answer is A. Seize the narcotics, as their incriminating nature is immediately apparent and they are in plain view during a lawful search. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. The officer must act decisively while adhering strictly to North Carolina law and CMPD policy regarding the handling of sensitive information and the execution of search warrants. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising the investigation or violating constitutional rights. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the terms of the judicially authorized search warrant. This means only searching for and seizing items explicitly listed in the warrant, and doing so in a manner that minimizes intrusion and disruption. This approach is correct because it is grounded in the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and North Carolina General Statutes Chapter 15A, Article 11, which governs search warrants. These legal frameworks mandate that warrants must be specific and that searches must be limited to the scope defined by the warrant. Adhering to the warrant's specificity ensures that the search is reasonable and lawful, preventing overreach and protecting the rights of the individual. An incorrect approach would be to expand the search beyond the items listed in the warrant based on a hunch or suspicion that other illegal items might be present. This violates the specificity requirement of the Fourth Amendment and North Carolina law, as it constitutes a search without probable cause or judicial authorization for those additional items. Another incorrect approach would be to seize items not listed in the warrant but that appear to be related to criminal activity, even if they are in plain view. While the plain view doctrine exists, its application is narrow and requires that the incriminating nature of the item be immediately apparent and that the officer be lawfully present. Without these conditions met, seizing such items is unlawful. A further incorrect approach would be to delay the execution of the warrant or to conduct the search in a manner that is unnecessarily destructive or intrusive, which could be challenged as unreasonable under the Fourth Amendment and potentially violate CMPD policies on search execution. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves thoroughly understanding the scope and limitations of any legal authorization, such as a search warrant, before acting. It requires a commitment to acting within the bounds of established law and departmental policy, and a willingness to seek clarification or guidance when faced with ambiguity. The process should involve 1. Reviewing the authorization document, e.g., warrant, carefully to understand its precise terms. 2. Executing the authorization in a manner that is reasonable, minimally intrusive, and strictly limited to its authorized scope. 3. Documenting all actions taken during the execution of the authorization. 4. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel if any questions or uncertainties arise during the process. Question 3. The efficiency study reveals that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, has received a citizen complaint alleging excessive force by an officer during a traffic stop. The complaint is detailed and includes the citizen's account of the incident. What is the most appropriate initial step for the CMPD to take in addressing this complaint, adhering to North Carolina general statutes and departmental policy? Option A. Have the direct supervisor of the accused officer conduct an initial review and provide a preliminary assessment of the complaint's validity. Option B. Dismiss the complaint if the citizen's initial statement lacks definitive proof of excessive force, pending further evidence. Option C. Assign the complaint to an independent internal affairs investigator for a thorough and impartial investigation, including evidence collection and witness interviews. Option D. Accept the written statement from the accused officer as sufficient to close the complaint, provided it refutes the allegations. The correct answer is C. Assign the complaint to an independent internal affairs investigator for a thorough and impartial investigation, including evidence collection and witness interviews. Explanation: The efficiency study reveals a critical juncture for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, regarding the handling of citizen complaints. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative of thorough investigation with the need for timely resolution, all while upholding public trust and adhering to North Carolina general statutes and CMPD policy. The potential for bias, incomplete evidence, or procedural missteps can severely damage community relations and undermine the integrity of the department. The most effective approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes impartiality and thoroughness. This includes immediately assigning the complaint to an independent internal affairs investigator who has no prior involvement with the officers named. This investigator must be trained in evidence collection, interviewing techniques, and relevant North Carolina laws pertaining to police conduct and citizen rights. The investigation must meticulously document all witness statements, review available video footage, body-worn cameras, dash cams, surveillance, and examine relevant departmental policies and procedures. A comprehensive report detailing findings, supported by evidence, should then be submitted for review by a designated supervisor or board, who will make a determination based on the evidence and policy. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due process, fairness, and accountability, mandated by both North Carolina law and established best practices in law enforcement, internal affairs investigations, ensuring that complaints are addressed objectively and transparently. An approach that involves the direct supervisor of the accused officers conducting the initial review and making a preliminary judgment is professionally unacceptable. This creates an inherent conflict of interest, as the supervisor may feel pressure to protect their subordinates or may have pre-existing relationships that compromise their impartiality. This fails to meet the ethical standard of an unbiased investigation and could violate CMPD policy designed to ensure independent review. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the complaint outright due to a lack of immediate, overwhelming evidence, without conducting a thorough investigation. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the department's commitment to addressing all citizen concerns and can be perceived as a cover-up, eroding public trust. North Carolina law and CMPD policy generally require a good faith effort to investigate all credible allegations of misconduct. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the accused officer's written statements without independent corroboration or further investigation is insufficient. While officers are required to provide statements, these statements alone do not constitute a complete investigation. The department has a responsibility to seek out and analyze all available evidence to reach an accurate conclusion, as per standard investigative protocols and the expectation of thoroughness in public service. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with recognizing the gravity of citizen complaints and the need for a structured, impartial process. This involves understanding the relevant legal framework, North Carolina general statutes, and departmental policies, prioritizing objectivity, ensuring thorough evidence gathering, and maintaining clear communication throughout the investigative process. When faced with such situations, professionals should always default to the most transparent and accountable method, even if it requires more time and resources, to uphold the integrity of the department and the trust of the community. Question 4. Cost-benefit analysis shows that while immediate incapacitation of a resisting suspect might seem efficient, a Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officer encounters an individual actively resisting arrest but not posing an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury. Which of the following actions best aligns with CMPD policy and North Carolina law regarding the use of force and officer conduct? Option A. Immediately deploy a taser to incapacitate the suspect and end the resistance. Option B. Apply physical force beyond what is needed to control the suspect once they are no longer actively resisting. Option C. Attempt verbal de-escalation and control techniques, using only the minimum force necessary to gain compliance and thoroughly document all actions. Option D. Focus solely on subduing the suspect with physical force and defer detailed reporting until a later time. Correct answer is C. Attempt verbal de-escalation and control techniques, using only the minimum force necessary to gain compliance and thoroughly document all actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD officer regarding the appropriate use of force and the documentation thereof. The officer is faced with a situation where a suspect, while resisting arrest, poses a potential threat, but the level of threat is not immediately clear or escalating to a point where lethal force is unequivocally justified. The challenge lies in balancing the need to control a resisting suspect with the constitutional and departmental mandates to use only the force necessary to achieve lawful objectives, and to accurately and thoroughly document all use of force incidents. This requires careful judgment, adherence to policy, and an objective assessment of the situation in real time. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalation techniques and the use of force that is objectively reasonable and proportionate to the threat posed by the suspect. This approach prioritizes the preservation of life and safety for all parties involved, including the officer, the suspect, and the public. Specifically, the officer should attempt to verbally de-escalate the situation, utilize control holds or less lethal options if necessary and available, and only resort to higher levels of force if the suspect's actions create an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or others. Following the incident, a comprehensive and truthful report detailing the suspect's actions, the officer's response, and the justification for the level of force used is paramount. This aligns with North Carolina General Statutes and CMPD policy, which emphasize the lawful and reasonable use of force and the importance of accurate reporting. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately resorting to a higher level of force, such as a taser or firearm, without first attempting de-escalation or assessing the immediate threat. This fails to meet the standard of objectively reasonable force, as it may not be proportionate to the suspect's actions and could escalate the situation unnecessarily, violating constitutional protections against excessive force and CMPD policy. Another incorrect approach is to use excessive force beyond what is necessary to gain control of the suspect, even if resistance is present. This could involve striking the suspect repeatedly after they have been subdued or are no longer resisting, which is a clear violation of CMPD policy and North Carolina law regarding the use of force. Finally, failing to accurately and completely document the use of force, or intentionally omitting details about the suspect's actions or the officer's response, is a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This undermines accountability, hinders internal investigations, and can lead to a breakdown of public trust. Such omissions are contrary to the principles of transparency and integrity expected of law enforcement officers. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights, departmental policy, and ethical conduct. This involves a continuous assessment of the threat level, the use of de-escalation strategies whenever possible, and the selection of force that is objectively reasonable and proportionate. Documentation should always be truthful, complete, and timely, reflecting the officer's actions and the circumstances that led to the use of force. When in doubt, officers should err on the side of caution and utilize the least amount of force necessary to achieve a lawful objective. Question 5. The assessment process reveals that a patrol officer in Charlotte, North Carolina, responding to a call about a suspicious package left unattended in a busy public park, observes a dark, cylindrical object with wires protruding from it, emitting a faint ticking sound. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Secure the immediate area, establish a wide perimeter, and immediately request the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department's bomb squad and other relevant specialized units to respond. Option B. Inform parkgoers to remain calm and continue their activities while the officer observes the package from a distance. Option C. Immediately evacuate the entire park without notifying any specialized units, assuming the worst-case scenario. Option D. Attempt to cautiously move the suspicious package to a less populated area of the park to minimize potential casualties. Correct answer is A. Secure the immediate area, establish a wide perimeter, and immediately request the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department's bomb squad and other relevant specialized units to respond. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to protect public safety and the requirement to adhere to established legal procedures and individual rights. Officers must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring their actions are both effective and lawful. The correct approach involves immediately securing the scene and requesting specialized units, such as the bomb squad, while simultaneously initiating a preliminary assessment of the situation based on observable facts. This is correct because it prioritizes public safety by isolating the potential threat and bringing in experts. It also aligns with North Carolina law enforcement protocols that mandate the involvement of specialized units for suspected explosive devices, ensuring a controlled and safe resolution. This approach respects the rights of individuals by not taking premature action that could infringe upon them without sufficient cause, while still acting decisively to mitigate risk. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to disarm or move the suspicious package without the presence of the bomb squad. This is ethically and legally unacceptable, as it bypasses established safety protocols designed to protect both the public and the officers involved. Such an action could lead to severe injury or death, and would likely violate departmental policies and state laws regarding the handling of hazardous materials and potential threats. Another incorrect approach would be to evacuate the immediate area, but fail to notify the appropriate specialized units, or to cordon off a sufficiently wide perimeter. This is problematic because it creates a false sense of security by only partially addressing the threat. It fails to bring in the necessary expertise to neutralize the danger, and may not adequately protect individuals beyond the immediate vicinity from potential harm. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the suspicious package as a prank, without any form of verification or consultation with supervisors or specialized units. This is a critical failure in professional judgment and adherence to duty of care. It disregards the potential for serious harm and could have catastrophic consequences if the package were indeed a genuine threat. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to follow standard operating procedures for suspicious items. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate threat assessment, followed by adherence to established protocol for hazardous situations. This includes prioritizing safety, seeking expert assistance, and ensuring all actions are legally sound and ethically justifiable, always erring on the side of caution when public safety is at stake. Question 6. Analysis of a chaotic domestic disturbance call in Charlotte, North Carolina, where officers arrived to find signs of a struggle, including overturned furniture and a broken window. A potential weapon is visible on the floor near the point of entry. Considering the immediate need to ensure officer safety and de-escalate the situation, what is the most appropriate initial course of action regarding the potential evidence? Option A. Rely on the officer's collective memory to recall the state of the scene and the location of the weapon for later documentation. Option B. Immediately secure the entire scene, meticulously document all observations and the location of the potential weapon, and then proceed with interviewing parties involved in collecting evidence. Option C. Quickly collect the visible weapon and any other obvious items of evidence to expedite the process, assuming the scene will remain undisturbed. Option D. Focus on apprehending any individuals present, and then address the scene and evidence once the immediate threat is neutralized. The correct answer is B. Immediately secure the entire scene, meticulously document all observations and the location of the potential weapon, and then proceed with interviewing parties involved in collecting evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the meticulous adherence to established legal procedures for evidence handling. Officers are tasked with responding to a volatile situation, which can create pressure to act swiftly. However, the integrity of potential evidence is paramount to a successful prosecution and upholding the principles of justice. Failure to properly document and secure evidence can lead to its inadmissibility in court, undermining the entire investigative process and potentially allowing a perpetrator to evade accountability. This requires a high degree of professionalism, attention to detail, and an understanding of the legal ramifications of procedural missteps. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene to prevent contamination or alteration of evidence, followed by a thorough and systematic documentation of all observations and collected items. This includes detailed notes on the location, condition, and chain of custody for each piece of evidence. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with North Carolina general statutes, particularly those governing criminal procedure and evidence. Specifically, the principles of proper evidence collection and preservation are fundamental to ensuring that evidence is admissible in court under the North Carolina Rules of Evidence. This systematic approach guarantees that the integrity of the evidence is maintained from the moment it is discovered until it is presented in court, thereby supporting the prosecution's case and upholding due process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing the immediate apprehension of a suspect over the meticulous documentation and preservation of the crime scene. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks compromising the integrity of crucial evidence. If evidence is disturbed, lost, or improperly documented before it can be secured, it may be deemed inadmissible in court, regardless of the strength of other investigative leads. This directly violates the principles of evidence handling mandated by North Carolina law, which requires careful collection and preservation to maintain its evidentiary value. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the memory of officers for details regarding the evidence found. This is a significant professional failure. Human memory is fallible, and relying on it for critical details such as the exact location, appearance, and circumstances of evidence discovery is insufficient to meet legal standards for admissibility. North Carolina law requires objective, documented evidence, not subjective recollections, to build a case. The absence of detailed, contemporaneous notes and proper chain of custody documentation renders the evidence unreliable and likely inadmissible. A third incorrect approach is to delegate the initial securing and documentation of evidence to an officer who is not fully trained in evidence handling protocols, or to assume that a general understanding is sufficient. This is a critical error. While all officers are expected to have a basic understanding, specialized training in evidence collection, preservation, and documentation is essential to ensure compliance with North Carolina's legal requirements. Proper handling, even if unintentional, can lead to contamination, loss, or misidentification of evidence, thereby jeopardizing the investigation and the prosecution's ability to secure a conviction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and procedural mandates. This involves a clear understanding of the specific laws and regulations governing evidence handling in North Carolina. When faced with a situation requiring evidence collection, the process should be 1. Secure the scene. 2. Observe and document meticulously. 3. Collect evidence systematically. 4. Maintain a strict chain of custody. And 5. Ensure all actions are recorded contemporaneously and accurately. This structured approach minimizes the risk of procedural errors and maximizes the likelihood that evidence will be admissible in court, thereby serving the interests of justice. Question 7. The review process indicates that during an apprehension in Charlotte, North Carolina, a subject who had initially resisted arrest became compliant and was handcuffed. However, the arresting officer continued to hold the subject in a forceful, prone position for an additional 30 seconds before allowing them to be moved to a seated position, and then proceeded to the booking station without immediately checking for injuries or documenting the specific force used beyond a general statement of lawful arrest. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to have taken immediately after the subject became compliant and was handcuffed? Option A. Continue the prone hold until the subject is placed in the patrol vehicle, then conduct a cursory check for visible injuries before proceeding to booking. Option B. Immediately release the subject from the forceful hold, ensure they are safely seated, assess for any injuries, and then proceed with booking while initiating the incident report to document all force used and the subject's condition. Option C. Allow the subject to stand up immediately after handcuffing and proceed to booking without a specific medical check, assuming no injuries occurred. Option D. Maintain the forceful hold for an additional period to ensure the subject is fully subdued and then proceed to booking, documenting the arrest generally. The correct answer is B. Immediately release the subject from the forceful hold, ensure they are safely seated, assess for any injuries, and then proceed with booking while initiating the incident report to document all force used and the subject's condition. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential lapse in adherence to North Carolina general statutes concerning the use of force and departmental policy regarding de-escalation techniques during a recent apprehension. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance the immediate need for public safety and officer safety with the legal and ethical obligations to use only necessary force and to prioritize de-escalation when feasible. The pressure of a dynamic situation can lead to hasty decisions, making a structured, policy-driven approach critical. The best professional approach involves immediately ceasing the application of force once the subject is under control and compliant, and then prioritizing medical assessment and documentation. This aligns with North Carolina General Statute 14-288, 21, which emphasizes that law enforcement officers shall use only the force that is reasonably necessary to effect an arrest, prevent escape, or overcome resistance. Once resistance ceases, the necessity for force ends. Furthermore, CMPD policy, like most law enforcement agencies, mandates that officers assess the need for medical attention for any individual subjected to force and ensure proper documentation of the incident and any injuries sustained. This approach prioritizes the well-being of the subject, upholds legal standards, and ensures thorough accountability. An incorrect approach would be to continue restraining the subject with force after they have stopped resisting, solely out of frustration or a perceived need for continued control. This violates the principle of proportionality of force and could lead to excessive force claims, contravening North Carolina law and departmental policy. Another incorrect approach is to neglect immediate medical assessment and documentation, assuming no injury occurred. This failure to follow protocol can obscure potential harm, hinder proper investigation if a complaint arises, and violate CMPD duty of care and reporting requirements. Finally, an approach that involves delaying the documentation of the incident until much later, without immediate notes, risks memory degradation and omissions, compromising the accuracy and integrity of the official record, which is crucial for accountability and legal review. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with an immediate assessment of the situation. Is the subject compliant? Is there an ongoing threat? If the threat is neutralized and the subject is compliant, the immediate priority shifts to control, then medical assessment, and finally, thorough and timely documentation. This framework emphasizes adherence to legal statutes and departmental policies as the primary guide for action, even under pressure. Question 8. Performance analysis shows a recurring pattern of minor property damage incidents reported by residents in a specific patrol zone within Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to address this trend? Option A. Analyze the incident data for geographical and temporal patterns, and engage with residents in the affected area to gather further information and identify potential contributing factors. Option B. Document each incident as it occurs and respond accordingly, without further investigation into underlying causes. Option C. Increase random patrols and stops in the affected zone, focusing on individuals who appear suspicious to deter further incidents. Option D. Advise residents to install private security systems and report any future damage, considering the incidents too minor for departmental intervention beyond individual responses. The correct answer is A. Analyze the incident data for geographical and temporal patterns, and engage with residents in the affected area to gather further information and identify potential contributing factors. Explanation. Performance analysis shows a recurring pattern of minor property damage incidents reported by residents in a specific patrol zone within Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina. These incidents, while individually minor, collectively suggest a potential underlying issue that requires a proactive and systematic approach rather than reactive responses to each isolated event. The challenge lies in identifying the root cause and implementing effective preventative measures without over-allocating resources or infringing on citizen rights. A thorough understanding of CMPD policies and North Carolina law regarding property rights, community policing, and evidence handling is crucial. The most effective approach involves a comprehensive review of the incident data to identify any geographical or temporal patterns, followed by targeted community engagement to gather qualitative information from residents. This data-driven, community-oriented strategy aligns with the principles of community policing, emphasizing collaboration and problem-solving. It allows for the identification of systemic issues, such as inadequate lighting, poorly maintained public spaces, or even a pattern of minor vandalism that could be addressed through increased visibility or community watch programs. This proactive stance is supported by the CMPD commitment to public safety and crime prevention, aiming to address issues before they escalate. An approach that focuses solely on responding to each reported incident as it occurs, without attempting to identify a broader pattern, is inefficient and fails to address potential root causes. This reactive strategy consumes resources without a long-term solution. Similarly, an approach that involves increased surveillance or stops of individuals in the affected area without specific probable cause or reasonable suspicion would violate Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures under North Carolina law. Such actions could lead to civil liability and erode community trust. Finally, an approach that dismisses the pattern as insignificant due to the minor nature of individual incidents overlooks the potential for these small issues to indicate larger problems or to escalate if left unaddressed, thus failing in the duty to maintain public order and safety. Professionals should employ a problem-oriented policing framework. This involves defining the problem, analyzing its causes, developing and implementing solutions, and evaluating their effectiveness. This systematic process, grounded in data and community input, allows for the most efficient and effective allocation of resources while respecting legal and ethical boundaries. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a high-impact event involving an individual exhibiting erratic behavior in a public park within Charlotte, North Carolina. Officers arrive on the scene and observe the individual pacing aggressively, shouting incoherently, and making sudden, unpredictable movements. There are other civilians present in the vicinity. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the responding Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department officers? Option A. Immediately approach the individual and attempt to physically restrain them to prevent any potential escalation. Option B. Attempt verbal de-escalation and maintain a safe tactical distance while observing the individual's behavior for further indicators of threat. Option C. Withdraw from the immediate area and wait for specialized units to arrive without making any attempt to engage or observe. Option D. Deploy a less lethal option to incapacitate the individual due to their unpredictable movements and loud shouting. The correct answer is B. Attempt verbal de-escalation and maintain a safe tactical distance while observing the individual's behavior for further indicators of threat. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a high-impact event. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an immediate and decisive response based on incomplete information, balancing the need for swift action with the potential for overreaction or underestimation of the threat. The Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officers must adhere to North Carolina general statutes and departmental policies regarding the use of force and incident response. The best approach involves a measured, de-escalatory strategy that prioritizes officer and public safety while gathering more information. This includes attempting verbal communication to assess the individual's intent and mental state, observing their behavior for immediate threats, and maintaining a safe distance to allow for tactical advantage and further assessment. This aligns with CMPD training on de-escalation techniques and the legal framework in North Carolina that emphasizes proportionality in response to perceived threats. The goal is to resolve the situation without unnecessary force, consistent with the principles of community policing and the legal duty to act reasonably. An approach that immediately resorts to physical intervention or the use of less lethal force without a clear, imminent threat is professionally unacceptable. Such an action could violate North Carolina General Statute Section 14-277. 4. Concerning assault on a law enforcement officer if the individual has not committed an offense, or it could constitute excessive force if the threat level does not justify the level of intervention. Furthermore, failing to attempt verbal de-escalation or gather more information before acting demonstrates a disregard for departmental policy and the ethical obligation to use force only as a last resort. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to withdraw from the situation entirely without any attempt to assess or mitigate the potential risk. While officer safety is paramount, abandoning a potentially volatile situation without any follow-up or notification to other units could leave the public vulnerable and violate the duty to protect and serve. This inaction could be seen as a dereliction of duty if the situation subsequently escalates due to the lack of police presence. The professional decision-making process in such a situation should involve a rapid assessment of the threat level, considering the individual's behavior, environment, and any available intelligence. Officers should then employ de-escalation techniques, communicate clearly, and maintain tactical awareness. The use of force should be a last resort, proportional to the threat, and in accordance with North Carolina law and CMPD policy. Continuous reassessment of the situation is crucial, adapting the response as new information becomes available. Question 10. Investigation of Officer Miller's recent timesheet reveals 160 hours worked in a standard 2-week pay period, with an additional 12 hours of overtime. Officer Miller's base hourly rate is $28.50. According to North Carolina general statutes and CMPD policy, overtime is compensated at 1.5 times the regular hourly rate. What is the total overtime pay Officer Miller is entitled to for this pay period? Option A, $513.00. Option B, $427.50. Option C, $342.00. Option D, $600.00. Correct answer is A, $513.00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officer by requiring the accurate calculation of overtime pay based on North Carolina general statutes and CMPD departmental policies. Miscalculation can lead to financial discrepancies for officers and potential legal challenges against the department. The officer must demonstrate attention to detail and a thorough understanding of the relevant pay scales and regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously reviewing the officer's regular hourly rate, the number of overtime hours worked, and the applicable overtime multiplier as defined by North Carolina law and CMPD policy. This approach ensures accuracy by directly applying the established pay structure. For example, if an officer's base pay is $25 per hour and they work 10 hours of overtime at a rate of 1.5 times their regular pay, the overtime calculation would be // text overtime pay equals / text regular hourly rate times / text overtime multiplier times / text overtime hours / text overtime pay equals $25 times 1.5 times 10 text overtime pay equals $37.50 times 10 text overtime pay equals $375. This method directly adheres to the principles of fair compensation and regulatory compliance, preventing underpayment or overpayment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to estimate the overtime pay without precise calculation, perhaps by rounding up or down the hourly rate or the number of hours. This fails to meet the standard of accuracy required by financial regulations and departmental policy, potentially leading to financial disputes. Another incorrect approach would be to apply a flat overtime rate without considering the specific multiplier mandated by North Carolina general statutes for law enforcement officers, which often dictates a rate of 1.5 times the regular rate for hours worked beyond a standard workweek. This disregard for the statutory multiplier results in an inaccurate and non-compliant pay calculation. A further incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a colleague's previous overtime calculation without verifying the figures and the underlying policy. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and personal responsibility for ensuring accurate compensation, potentially perpetuating errors. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must approach financial calculations with a commitment to accuracy and adherence to established guidelines. This involves understanding the relevant statutes and departmental policies, performing calculations methodically, and verifying the results. When faced with such tasks, a professional should always refer to the official documentation, perform the calculation step by step, and cross-reference with any available payroll or HR resources to ensure compliance and fairness. Question 11. Comparative studies suggest that when an officer with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department encounters an individual in a public space and has a reasonable suspicion that the individual may be involved in a recent crime, but lacks probable cause for an arrest or search warrant, what is the most legally sound and ethically appropriate course of action to potentially gather evidence? Option A. Conduct a pat-down search for weapons based on the reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, regardless of whether the individual consents. Option B. Inform the individual of the officer's suspicion, clearly state that they have the right to refuse a search, and request voluntary consent to search their person or belongings. Option C. Detain the individual for an extended period to further investigate their potential involvement in the crime, without explicitly informing them of their right to refuse a search. Option D. Immediately request backup and prepare to obtain a search warrant based solely on the reasonable suspicion, without first attempting to gain voluntary consent. The correct answer is B. Inform the individual of the officer's suspicion, clearly state that they have the right to refuse a search, and request voluntary consent to search their person or belongings. Explanation. Comparative studies suggest that effective law enforcement requires a nuanced understanding of community engagement and the legal framework governing police interactions. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual and the established protocols for investigative procedures within North Carolina. The officer must exercise careful judgment to avoid compromising the investigation or violating an individual's rights, which could lead to legal repercussions and damage community trust. The best professional approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes obtaining consent for a search while clearly informing the individual of their rights. This includes explicitly stating that the individual has the right to refuse consent and that any refusal will not negatively impact the officer's actions beyond the scope of the lawful search. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and North Carolina case law that emphasizes the voluntariness of consent. By obtaining voluntary and informed consent, the officer establishes a lawful basis for the search, thereby safeguarding the integrity of any evidence obtained and protecting the department from potential legal challenges. This method respects individual liberties while advancing the investigative goals. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a search based on a vague suspicion without explicit consent, even if the officer believes the individual might be hiding something. This is ethically and legally flawed because it bypasses the requirement for probable cause or consent for a search, violating the Fourth Amendment. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found and expose the officer and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to civil liability. Another incorrect approach is to pressure or coerce the individual into consenting by implying negative consequences for refusal, such as prolonged detention or increased scrutiny. This is unacceptable as it renders the consent involuntary and therefore invalid. Legally, consent must be freely and voluntarily given, not the product of duress or coercion. Ethically, it erodes the trust between the police and the community, undermining the department's legitimacy. A further incorrect approach is to abandon the investigation entirely due to the lack of immediate probable cause for a warrant, without attempting to secure voluntary consent. While probable cause is essential for a warrant, officers can and should explore lawful avenues to gather information, including seeking consent for searches when appropriate and legally permissible. This approach fails to utilize available, lawful investigative tools. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the legal basis for any proposed action. This involves understanding constitutional protections, relevant state laws, and departmental policies. When faced with a situation requiring a search, the officer should first consider if probable cause exists for a warrant. If not, the next step is to explore the possibility of obtaining voluntary consent, ensuring the individual is fully informed of their rights, including the right to refuse. Throughout the interaction, maintaining professionalism, respect, and transparency is paramount to building and preserving community trust. Question 12. The investigation demonstrates that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officers received an anonymous tip alleging that a specific individual, matching a detailed description, was currently inside a private residence in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was in possession of illegal narcotics. The tip also provided the exact address. The officers arrived at the location and observed the described individual briefly appear at a window before retreating inside. Based on this information, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the CMPD officers to take? Option A. Wait outside the residence for an extended period to observe further activity, potentially allowing the suspect time to dispose of the narcotics. Option B. Enter the residence without a warrant, based on the detailed anonymous tip and the brief sighting of the individual, to prevent the potential destruction of evidence. Option C. Immediately seek a search warrant from a magistrate, presenting all gathered information, including the anonymous tip and their independent observation of the individual matching the description appearing at the window. Option D. Detain the individual outside the residence if they emerge and attempt to obtain their consent to search the premises. Correct answer is C. Immediately seek a search warrant from a magistrate, presenting all gathered information, including the anonymous tip and their independent observation of the individual matching the description appearing at the window. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to secure evidence and the imperative to uphold the constitutional rights of individuals, specifically the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures as guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, as interpreted and applied by North Carolina law. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officers must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing interests. The best professional practice involves obtaining a search warrant based on probable cause before entering and searching a private residence. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. North Carolina law, like federal law, requires law enforcement officers to demonstrate probable cause to a neutral and detached magistrate who then issues a warrant. This process ensures that any intrusion into a person's home is justified by sufficient evidence and is conducted in a manner that respects individual privacy and liberty. By seeking a warrant, the CMPD officers are adhering to established legal procedures designed to prevent arbitrary government intrusion and to ensure that searches are conducted only when there is a reasonable belief that evidence of a crime will be found. An incorrect approach would be to enter the residence without a warrant based solely on the anonymous tip, even if the tip provided a detailed description of the suspect. This is professionally unacceptable because an anonymous tip, without independent corroboration by the officers, generally does not establish probable cause sufficient to justify a warrantless search of a home. Relying solely on such information risks violating the Fourth Amendment and North Carolina's search and seizure protections, potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence found and civil liability for the department. Another incorrect approach would be to delay entry significantly to gather more information, allowing the suspect time to destroy evidence. While the desire to preserve evidence is understandable, it does not override the constitutional requirement for a warrant unless exigent circumstances are present. Simply having a tip, even a detailed one, does not automatically create exigent circumstances. The officers must have a reasonable belief that evidence is in imminent danger of being removed or destroyed, which requires more than mere speculation. A third incorrect approach would be to detain the suspect outside the residence based on the tip and then attempt to gain consent to search the home. While consent can waive the warrant requirement, consent must be voluntary and freely given. If the detention itself is unlawful, lacking reasonable suspicion, any subsequent consent obtained may be considered tainted and invalid. Furthermore, relying on consent as the primary means to bypass the warrant requirement can be problematic if the circumstances surrounding the request for consent are coercive, or if the individual is not fully aware of their right to refuse. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of the information available, focusing on whether it rises to the level of probable cause. Officers should consider whether the information can be independently corroborated through their own observations or other reliable sources. If probable cause exists, the next step is to determine if exigent circumstances justify a warrantless entry. If neither probable cause nor exigent circumstances are present, the professional decision-making process dictates that officers must seek a search warrant from a magistrate before entering a private residence. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally sound and ethically defensible, protecting both public safety and individual rights. Question 13. Assessment of a situation in Charlotte, North Carolina, where a CMPD officer is responding to a noise complaint and observes a civilian filming the interaction from a public sidewalk approximately 20 feet away. The civilian is not obstructing the officer's path or interfering with the investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CMPD officer? Option A. Engage the civilian in a debate about their right to film police officers in public. Option B. Immediately order the civilian to stop recording and confiscate their recording device, citing potential interference. Option C. Ignore the civilian and proceed with the noise complaint as if they were not present. Option D. Inform the civilian that recording is permissible as long as it does not interfere with the investigation or create a safety hazard, and continue with the noise complaint response. Correct answer is D. Inform the civilian that recording is permissible as long as it does not interfere with the investigation or create a safety hazard, and continue with the noise complaint response. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing upon constitutional rights or escalating the situation unnecessarily. Misjudging the situation could lead to a violation of civil liberties, a complaint, or even legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation and clearly communicating the department's policy on recording. This approach acknowledges the citizen's right to record, while setting reasonable boundaries if their actions impede lawful police operations. Specifically, the officer should inform the individual that recording is permissible as long as it does not interfere with the investigation or create a safety hazard. This aligns with the principles of transparency and accountability, which are often supported by departmental policies and legal precedents regarding public observation of law enforcement. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, has policies in place that generally permit citizens to record officers in public spaces, provided it does not obstruct official duties. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately demand the citizen stop recording and confiscate their device. This action directly infringes upon the individual's right to record police activity in a public space, which is a protected First Amendment right in many jurisdictions, including North Carolina. Such an action would likely violate CMPD policy and could lead to a civil rights lawsuit. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the citizen and continue the interaction as if they were not present. While the citizen has a right to record, ignoring them entirely could be perceived as unprofessional and might embolden the individual to escalate their behavior if they feel unheard or dismissed. It fails to address any potential, albeit unlikely, interference and misses an opportunity for professional engagement. A third incorrect approach is to engage in an argument with the citizen about their right to record. While the officer should be firm about maintaining order, engaging in a debate can be counterproductive, consume valuable time, and potentially escalate the situation. The focus should remain on the primary law enforcement duty while addressing any interference professionally and concisely. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a de-escalation and communication-first strategy. This involves assessing the situation for actual interference or safety risks, clearly articulating departmental policy and legal rights, and maintaining a calm and professional demeanor. If interference is occurring, the officer should issue a clear, specific warning about the nature of the interference and the consequences of non-compliance before considering any enforcement action. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that immediate and thorough documentation of a use-of-force incident, including the suspect's actions, the officer's observations, the justification for force, and the specific force used, is crucial for accountability and legal compliance within the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Considering a scenario where an officer apprehends a suspect who has a history of violence and actively resists arrest, leading to the officer employing force, which of the following documentation approaches best aligns with CMPD policy and North Carolina law? Option A. The officer focuses on documenting the suspect's apprehension and any injuries sustained by the suspect, omitting specific details about the force used by the officer and the immediate circumstances necessitating it. Option B. The officer delays the detailed documentation of the use of force, intending to complete it after conferring with other officers involved to ensure a consistent narrative. Option C. The officer meticulously records all details of the suspect's resistance, the officer's actions, the specific force employed, and the justification for its use, ensuring the report is factual and objective. Option D. The officer documents the apprehension and the suspect's resistance, but provides only a general statement that necessary force was used without detailing the specific actions or justification. The correct answer is C. The officer meticulously records all details of the suspect's resistance, the officer's actions, the specific force employed, and the justification for its use, ensuring the report is factual and objective. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department (CMPD) officer regarding the appropriate use of force and the subsequent documentation. The officer must balance the immediate need to apprehend a fleeing suspect, who has demonstrated a propensity for violence, with the legal and ethical obligations to use only necessary force and to accurately report all actions. The complexity arises from the subjective nature of necessary force and the potential for bias or omission in reporting, which can have significant legal and departmental repercussions. Accurate and thorough documentation is paramount for accountability, transparency, and ensuring that departmental policies and North Carolina law regarding use of force were followed. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer immediately and thoroughly documenting the entire encounter, including the suspect's actions, the officer's observations, the justification for the use of force, the specific force used, and any injuries sustained by the suspect or officer. This approach aligns with CMPD policy and North Carolina general statutes, which mandate detailed reporting of all use of force incidents. The documentation must be objective, factual, and complete, providing a clear record of events that can be reviewed by supervisors and potentially the courts. This ensures transparency, accountability, and adherence to legal standards for use of force, such as the objective reasonableness standard established in Graham v. Connor as interpreted and applied within North Carolina. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only document the apprehension and the suspect's resistance, omitting the specific details of the force used and the justification for its necessity. This failure to provide a complete account violates CMPD reporting requirements and North Carolina's legal framework for use of force, which necessitates justification for every level of force employed. It creates a gap in the record, making it impossible to objectively assess whether the force used was lawful and appropriate. Another incorrect approach is to rely on a general statement that necessary force was used without detailing the specific actions taken and the circumstances that necessitated them. This lacks the specificity required by both departmental policy and legal precedent. It is an insufficient justification and fails to demonstrate that the officer considered alternatives or that the force used was proportional to the threat posed. A third incorrect approach is to delay or omit the documentation of the use of force, hoping it will be overlooked or to allow for the narrative to be shaped later. This is a serious ethical and legal violation. Prompt and accurate reporting is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the investigation and ensuring that the use of force is reviewed in a timely manner, preventing potential manipulation of facts and upholding the principles of due process and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to policy and law, followed by objective fact-gathering and reporting. This involves 1. Immediately assessing the situation and ensuring officer and public safety. 2. Understanding and applying departmental use of force policies and relevant state laws. 3. Gathering all pertinent facts about the suspect's actions and the environment. 4. Documenting all actions taken, including the justification for and nature of any force used, with meticulous detail and objectivity. 5. Seeking supervisory review and further investigation, as required by policy. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and properly recorded for accountability. Question 15. Regulatory review indicates that a Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officer observes a vehicle parked in a high-crime area known for drug activity. The driver appears nervous and avoids eye contact when the officer approaches. The officer suspects the driver may be involved in illegal drug sales. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to investigate this suspicion while adhering to North Carolina law and constitutional protections? Option A. Detain the driver for an extended period without making an arrest, hoping they will eventually consent to a search. Option B. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the driver's nervousness and the vehicle's location. Option C. Question the driver extensively about their activities without advising them of their rights, believing they are not yet in custody. Option D. Secure a search warrant for the vehicle after establishing probable cause through further observation and investigation. The correct answer is D. Secure a search warrant for the vehicle after establishing probable cause through further observation and investigation. Explanation. Regulatory review indicates that officers of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, are tasked with enforcing laws and maintaining public order within North Carolina. This scenario presents a challenge because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual. The professional challenge lies in gathering evidence without infringing upon established legal protections, particularly concerning search and seizure, which are governed by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and interpreted through North Carolina case law. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between lawful investigative steps and unlawful intrusions. The approach that represents best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This is correct because the Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. A warrant, issued by a neutral magistrate, signifies that a judge has reviewed the evidence presented by law enforcement and determined that probable cause exists to believe that a crime has been committed and that evidence of that crime will be found in the place to be searched. This process ensures that police actions are judicially sanctioned and based on specific, articulable facts, thereby safeguarding individual liberties while allowing for effective law enforcement. An approach that involves conducting a warrantless search of the vehicle based solely on the officer's suspicion that the individual might be involved in criminal activity is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the probable cause standard required for a lawful search under the Fourth Amendment. While an officer may have a hunch, suspicion alone does not constitute probable cause. This approach risks violating the individual's constitutional rights, leading to the suppression of any evidence found and potential civil liability for the department. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to detain the individual indefinitely without making an arrest or obtaining a warrant, hoping they will eventually consent to a search. This constitutes an unlawful seizure and detention, as individuals cannot be held without reasonable suspicion for a stop, Terry stop, or probable cause for an arrest. Prolonged detention without legal justification violates the principles of due process and freedom from unreasonable restraint. Finally, an approach that involves questioning the individual extensively about their activities without informing them of their right to remain silent or their right to an attorney, especially if they are in custody, is also professionally unacceptable. This violates the principles established in Miranda v. Arizona, which requires law enforcement to inform individuals of their constitutional rights when they are subjected to custodial interrogation. Failure to do so can render any statements made inadmissible in court. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of the facts and circumstances against established legal standards. Officers must be trained to recognize the nuances between reasonable suspicion, probable cause, and mere hunch. They should understand the specific exceptions to the warrant requirement and when they are applicable. In situations where probable cause is present but a warrant cannot be immediately obtained due to exigent circumstances, officers must be able to articulate those circumstances clearly. Furthermore, adherence to Miranda warnings when custodial interrogation is contemplated is paramount. The ultimate goal is to gather necessary information and evidence while upholding the constitutional rights of all individuals. Question 16. Consider a scenario where a Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officer observes a vehicle with a broken taillight driving erratically in a residential area late at night. The officer has a hunch that the driver might be under the influence. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officer to take regarding a search of the vehicle? Option A. Approach the vehicle and without any verbal interaction, reach into the vehicle to inspect the driver's side floorboard for any suspicious items. Option B. Detain the driver and inform them that the vehicle will be searched due to the erratic driving and broken taillight. Option C. Approach the vehicle, initiate a lawful traffic stop, and politely request consent from the driver to search the vehicle. Option D. Immediately open the driver's side door and begin searching the vehicle's interior for any contraband. The correct answer is C. Approach the vehicle, initiate a lawful traffic stop, and politely request consent from the driver to search the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the immediate need to gather information and the legal and ethical obligations to respect an individual's rights and privacy. The officer must balance their duty to investigate a potential crime with the constitutional protections afforded to citizens, particularly regarding search and seizure. Misjudging the legal boundaries can lead to evidence being inadmissible in court, disciplinary action, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves approaching the individual and politely requesting consent to search their vehicle. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. By seeking voluntary consent, the officer establishes a lawful basis for the search if granted. If consent is refused, the officer must then rely on probable cause or other recognized exceptions to the warrant requirement to proceed with a search. This method prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, ensuring that any evidence obtained is admissible and that the officer acts within their authority. Incorrect approaches analysis. Approaching the vehicle and immediately initiating a search without any interaction or request for consent is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. This action presumes probable cause without establishing it and infringes upon the individual's right to be free from unreasonable searches. Such an approach would render any evidence found inadmissible. Opening the vehicle door and looking inside without any justification or consent, even if not physically touching anything, still constitutes a search. This action bypasses the requirement for probable cause or consent and is therefore an unlawful intrusion. Detaining the individual and informing them that their vehicle will be searched regardless of their wishes, even if the officer suspects criminal activity, is an unlawful detention and search. This disregards the need for legal justification for both the stop and the subsequent search, violating constitutional protections. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves assessing the situation to determine if reasonable suspicion exists to justify a brief investigatory stop. If reasonable suspicion is present, the officer can approach the individual and engage in a conversation. During this interaction, the officer should assess if probable cause develops. If probable cause is established, or if the individual provides voluntary consent, a search may be lawful. If neither is present, the officer must respect the individual's right to refuse a search and cannot proceed without further legal justification. This systematic approach ensures actions are both effective and lawful. Question 17. Upon reviewing a traffic stop in Charlotte, North Carolina, an officer observes a civilian standing on the sidewalk approximately 20 feet away, openly recording the interaction with their smartphone. The civilian is not interfering with the officer's movement, nor are they verbally engaging with the officer or the driver. The officer feels uncomfortable with being recorded and believes it might make the driver more nervous. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Calmly acknowledge the civilian's presence and continue with the traffic stop, ensuring the recording does not impede operations or create a safety hazard. Option B. Approach the civilian and attempt to confiscate their smartphone, stating that recording is not permitted during a police stop. Option C. Ignore the recording and allow it to continue, even if it begins to distract the officer from properly conducting the traffic stop. Option D. Immediately order the civilian to cease recording, citing the officer's discomfort and the potential for the driver to become nervous. The correct answer is A. Calmly acknowledge the civilian's presence and continue with the traffic stop, ensuring the recording does not impede operations or create a safety hazard. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record and a law enforcement officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance the public's First Amendment right to observe and document police activity with the need to ensure the investigation is not compromised, evidence is not tampered with, and the safety of all involved is not jeopardized. Misjudging the situation could lead to legal repercussions for the department, erosion of public trust, and potential harm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation by calmly explaining the department's policy on recording, if one exists and is applicable, and clearly articulating any specific concerns related to the recording that might impede the investigation or compromise safety. This approach prioritizes communication and transparency while still asserting the need for operational integrity. For instance, if the recording is occurring in a way that obstructs an officer's movement or creates a safety hazard, the officer can politely request the individual move to a safer vantage point. This respects the citizen's right to record while addressing legitimate operational concerns. This aligns with the general principles of community policing and maintaining positive police-citizen interactions, which are implicitly supported by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's commitment to public service and accountability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the individual to stop recording without any explanation or justification. This action infringes upon the citizen's constitutional right to record police activity in public spaces, which is a protected form of free speech and a crucial aspect of government transparency. Such an action could lead to a civil rights lawsuit against the officer and the department. Another incorrect approach is to physically interfere with the recording device or attempt to confiscate it without probable cause or a warrant. This constitutes an unlawful seizure and a violation of the individual's property rights and their right to document. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of constitutional protections and can result in severe legal consequences. Third incorrect approach is to ignore the recording and allow it to continue even if it is actively obstructing the investigation or creating a clear safety risk. While respecting the right to record is important, officers also have a duty to ensure the safety of themselves, other officers, and the public, and to conduct investigations effectively. Allowing a recording to directly interfere with these duties without attempting to mitigate the interference is a dereliction of duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, clear communication, and adherence to constitutional rights and departmental policies. When faced with a situation involving citizen recording, officers should first assess if the recording is creating an immediate threat or obstruction. If not, they should allow it to proceed. If there are concerns, they should calmly and politely communicate those concerns to the individual, explaining any relevant policies or safety considerations, and seeking voluntary cooperation. If cooperation is not forthcoming and a genuine threat or obstruction exists, officers should then consider the least restrictive means necessary to address the situation, always mindful of legal and ethical boundaries. Question 18. When evaluating a situation where a witness has identified a suspect matching the description of an individual involved in a recent robbery in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the suspect is apprehended a few blocks away, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the arresting officer regarding questioning the suspect? Option A. Release the suspect if they do not immediately confess, as further questioning without confession would be unproductive. Option B. Arrest the suspect and transport them to the police station for questioning without initially providing Miranda warnings. Option C. Immediately begin questioning the suspect about the robbery to gather as much information as possible before they can lawyer up. Option D. Inform the suspect of their Miranda rights and then proceed with questioning about their whereabouts and involvement in the robbery. Correct answer is D. Inform the suspect of their Miranda rights and then proceed with questioning about their whereabouts and involvement in the robbery. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual and the procedural requirements for evidence collection. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering potential threats, the urgency of the investigation, and the legal boundaries of their actions. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising the investigation or violating an individual's rights. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and the individual, then clearly informing them of their rights before any questioning that could elicit an incriminating response. This approach respects the individual's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and Sixth Amendment right to counsel, as well as North Carolina's procedural guidelines for custodial interrogations. By Mirandizing the suspect before asking questions that are designed to elicit an incriminating response, the officer ensures that any statements made are admissible in court and that the investigation proceeds ethically and legally. This aligns with the principles of due process and the protection of individual liberties. An approach that involves questioning the individual extensively about their involvement in the crime before reading them their Miranda rights is procedurally flawed. This constitutes a custodial interrogation without proper advisement of rights, making any resulting statements potentially inadmissible under the exclusionary rule, as established by the Supreme Court and reflected in North Carolina law. This failure to adhere to Miranda warnings undermines the integrity of the investigation and can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence. Another incorrect approach is to immediately arrest the individual and transport them to the station without attempting to secure their cooperation or inform them of their rights. While arrest may be warranted, the subsequent interrogation must still adhere to Miranda requirements. Delaying or omitting the Miranda warning after the individual is in custody and subject to interrogation is a violation of their rights. Finally, an approach that involves releasing the individual without any questioning or further investigation, based solely on a lack of immediate evidence, would be professionally negligent if there is probable cause to believe they are involved. While officers must respect individual rights, they also have a duty to investigate crimes and gather evidence when legally permissible. This approach fails to pursue a potentially viable investigative avenue. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves a clear understanding of when an individual is in custody and subject to interrogation, triggering the requirement for Miranda warnings. Officers should be trained to assess situations rapidly, identify the need for Miranda, and execute the warnings accurately and promptly before engaging in questioning that could elicit incriminating statements. This systematic approach ensures both effective law enforcement and the protection of civil liberties. Question 19. The analysis reveals that a Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officer observes an individual loitering in a dimly lit alleyway at 2:00 a.m., exhibiting furtive movements. The officer approaches the individual to investigate. What is the most appropriate course of action regarding the officer's body-worn camera, BWC? Option A. Activate the body-worn camera immediately upon approaching the individual to investigate. Option B. Do not activate the body-worn camera, assuming the interaction will be brief and uneventful. Option C. Activate the body-worn camera only if the situation appears to be escalating towards a confrontation. Option D. Activate the body-worn camera only after the individual has been stopped and questioned, and the reason for the stop is established. The correct answer is A. Activate the body-worn camera immediately upon approaching the individual to investigate. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD officer encounters a situation requiring a delicate balance between community engagement and adherence to departmental policy regarding the use of body-worn cameras, BWC. The professional challenge lies in discerning when an interaction, even if seemingly minor, necessitates BWC activation to ensure transparency, accountability, and accurate record-keeping, while also avoiding unnecessary surveillance or intrusion. The officer must navigate the nuances of departmental policy, which likely emphasizes activation during all law enforcement encounters, including those involving potential violations or public interactions that could lead to complaints or commendations. The correct approach involves activating the BWC at the outset of the interaction with the individual exhibiting suspicious behavior. This aligns with CMPD likely policy, which mandates recording all law enforcement encounters, including those involving stops for investigative purposes or responses to calls for service. Activating the camera ensures that the entire interaction, from initial observation to resolution, is documented. This provides an objective record for potential review, protects both the officer and the public by capturing events as they unfold, and upholds the department's commitment to transparency and accountability. This proactive recording is crucial for establishing a clear timeline of events, officer conduct, and citizen behavior, thereby mitigating the risk of disputes or misinterpretations. An incorrect approach would be to delay BWC activation until after the individual has been stopped and questioned, or to only activate it if the situation escalates. This failure to record the initial observation of suspicious behavior means that a critical part of the encounter, which might provide context for the subsequent stop, is not documented. This could lead to accusations of selective recording or an incomplete account of the incident, undermining public trust and potentially violating departmental policy on comprehensive recording. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the officer's memory and not activate the BWC at all, assuming the interaction will be brief and uneventful. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Departmental policies on BWCs are designed to create a verifiable record, and omitting this record, even for seemingly minor interactions, erodes the principle of accountability. It leaves the interaction undocumented and open to subjective interpretation, which can be detrimental if a complaint arises or if the interaction is later called into question. A third incorrect approach would be to activate the BWC only after the individual has been identified and the reason for the stop is fully established, and then only if the officer perceives a potential for conflict. This selective activation is problematic as it implies a judgment call on when recording is necessary, rather than adhering to a policy of comprehensive recording. The initial observation of suspicious behavior, even if it doesn't immediately suggest conflict, is a legitimate part of law enforcement activity and should be recorded to provide a complete picture of the encounter. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding and consistent application of CMPD BWC policy. Officers should err on the side of caution and activate their BWCs whenever they engage in any law enforcement activity, including observations of suspicious behavior, traffic stops, or responses to calls for service. This proactive approach ensures that all interactions are documented, fostering transparency, accountability, and trust between the police department and the community it serves. When in doubt about whether an interaction requires BWC activation, the policy should be consulted, and activation should be prioritized. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a potential underpayment of overtime wages for CMPD officers during the last fiscal quarter. An officer worked 50 hours in a week that included a holiday, for which they received an additional $100 in holiday pay. Their base salary for that week, if working 40 hours, would equate to a regular hourly rate of $25.00. Assuming holiday pay is considered a premium that should not be included in the regular rate for overtime calculation, what is the correct overtime premium pay for that week? Option A, $100.00. Option B, $125.00. Option C, $137.50. Option D, $150.00. The correct answer is B, $125.00. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential discrepancy in the overtime calculations for officers within the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, during the last fiscal quarter. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires meticulous attention to detail, a thorough understanding of North Carolina labor laws pertaining to public safety employees, and the ability to accurately apply overtime pay rates to complex work schedules. Failure to correctly calculate overtime can lead to significant financial liabilities for the department, damage employee morale, and potentially result in legal action. The best approach involves a systematic review of individual officer timesheets, cross-referencing them with departmental policies on overtime approval and North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter 95, Article 1, concerning wage and hour laws. Specifically, this approach would involve calculating overtime based on hours worked exceeding 40 in a workweek, ensuring that holiday pay and other premium pay are correctly accounted for and do not artificially inflate the regular rate of pay for overtime calculation purposes. The formula for the overtime premium would be \0. 5 times text regular rate of pay times text overtime hours where the regular rate of pay is determined by dividing total earnings by total hours worked in a workweek, excluding overtime pay itself. This method ensures compliance with Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA principles, which are generally adopted and often mirrored by state regulations for public sector employees, and adheres to the principle of paying at least 1.5 times the employee's regular rate for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek. An incorrect approach would be to simply multiply all hours worked over 40 by a standard overtime rate without considering the nuances of the regular rate calculation, especially when premium pay for non-overtime hours, like holiday pay, is involved. This could lead to an underpayment or overpayment of overtime, violating the spirit and letter of wage and hour laws. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the payroll system's automated calculations without independent verification, as these systems can sometimes be misconfigured or fail to account for specific departmental policies or unique circumstances. A third incorrect approach would be to adjust overtime calculations based on perceived departmental budget constraints rather than strict adherence to legal requirements, which is unethical and illegal. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy, compliance, and fairness. This involves 1. Understanding the relevant legal framework, North Carolina wage and hour laws, and any applicable collective bargaining agreements. 2. Identifying all components of an officer's compensation that contribute to their regular rate of pay. 3. Applying the correct overtime calculation formula meticulously to each individual's pay period. 4. Performing independent verification of automated calculations. 5. Documenting the entire process and findings clearly.